When we look at the complex history of the Second World War, the Waffen-SS stands out as a unique and brutal organization. It was the military wing of the Nazi Party's Schutzstaffel, or SS. While many of its divisions were German, it also recruited hundreds of thousands of volunteers from across occupied Europe. Among these, the French 33rd Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS Charlemagne has a particularly fascinating and dark story. The central question that historians often grapple with is why this unit, composed of men from a nation defeated by Germany, was considered by some German commanders to be more ideologically reliable than many of its Eastern European counterparts. The answer is not simple. It lies deep within the motivations of the men who chose to wear the German uniform. The story of SS Charlemagne begins with earlier collaborationist units formed after the fall of France in 1940. French fascists, anti-communists, and adventurers were drawn to the German cause. They initially joined formations like the Legion of French Volunteers against Bolshevism, which fought on the Eastern Front. Over time, these various French units were merged and incorporated into the Waffen-SS, eventually becoming the Charlemagne Division in 1944. These were not conscripts forced into service. They were volunteers who had made a conscious decision to align themselves with Nazi Germany. Their commitment was not born from a national directive, but from a personal and political conviction, a fact that fundamentally shaped their behavior throughout the war. Unlike soldiers fighting for their own country, the French volunteers of Charlemagne had no homeland in the traditional sense to defend. France was under German occupation, and their own government in Vichy was a German puppet state. By joining the Waffen-SS, they were, in effect, fighting against the Allied powers, which included the Free French forces of Charles de Gaulle. This placed them in a unique and isolated position. They were seen as traitors by many of their countrymen. Their loyalty, therefore, could not be directed towards a national cause. Instead, it was attached to the ideological principles they believed they were upholding, which created a powerful, self-reinforcing bond within the unit. This ideological alignment is key to understanding their actions. The men of Charlemagne were not simply mercenaries or reluctant soldiers. They were true believers in a pan-European crusade against what they saw as the ultimate evil, Soviet Bolshevism. They viewed the war on the Eastern Front not as a German conquest, but as a defense of European civilization itself. This narrative was heavily promoted by Nazi propaganda, and it resonated deeply with these French fascists. For them, the fight was not about conquering territory or restoring French national honor in a traditional sense. It was a holy war, and their dedication to this cause would be tested in the final, desperate days of the Third Reich. The core motivation for the French volunteers was a powerful anti-communist ideology. In the 1930s and 40s, fear of communism was widespread across Europe, and for many on the far right, Nazi Germany seemed to be the only force strong enough to stop the spread of Stalin's Soviet Union. The volunteers of Charlemagne saw themselves as modern-day Crusaders, following in the footsteps of the historical Frankish Emperor Charlemagne, who had united parts of Europe against external threats. This historical narrative provided them with a sense of purpose and a noble justification for their actions. They were not fighting for Hitler or for Germany, they told themselves, but for Europe and for their deeply held political beliefs. This crusade narrative was essential because it replaced traditional patriotism. These Frenchmen had turned their backs on their own nation. Their government was collaborating with Germany, and the resistance was fighting against it. This left them in a state of political limbo. Their allegiance was not to a flag or a piece of land, but to an abstract idea: the destruction of Bolshevism and the creation of a new, fascist European order. This ideological conviction was a potent force. It bound them together in a brotherhood of shared belief, making them incredibly resilient in the face of adversity. Their fight was a matter of faith, and this made them predictable and reliable in the eyes of their German commanders. The contrast with many other foreign SS units is stark. While the Waffen-SS recruited from all over Europe, the motivations of these volunteers varied greatly. For the Frenchmen of Charlemagne, the decision to enlist was almost purely ideological. They gained little personally from their service. They were often ostracized by their families and faced the prospect of a traitor's death if captured by the Allies or the French resistance. Their willingness to fight, therefore, came from an internal source of conviction. This was not the case for all foreign legions. Many volunteers from other regions had more complex and often more practical reasons for joining the German war effort. This ideological purity, as the Nazis would have seen it, made Charlemagne a unique asset. German commanders knew that these men were not fighting for personal gain or out of a temporary alliance of convenience. They were fighting because they believed fervently in the cause. This meant they were less likely to question orders or waver when the situation became dire. Their commitment was absolute because it was tied to their core identity as anti-communist Crusaders. This unwavering belief would be demonstrated most dramatically in the final apocalyptic battle for Berlin, where their ideological zeal would lead them to make the ultimate sacrifice for a cause that was already lost. The situation for many Eastern European SS units was vastly different from that of the French. Volunteers from places like Latvia, Estonia, and Ukraine often joined the Waffen-SS for reasons that were deeply tied to their own national interests. For decades, their homelands had been caught between two powerful and oppressive neighbors, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Many of these men had experienced the brutality of Soviet occupation firsthand following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. For them, the German invasion in 1941 was seen not as a conquest, but as a liberation, however temporary and fraught with danger it might have been. Their primary motivation was often to fight against the Soviets to regain their national independence. This created a fundamental conflict of loyalty. While they were fighting under the German flag, their ultimate allegiance was frequently to their own people and their own land. As the tide of the war turned and the Red Army pushed westward, these Eastern European soldiers found themselves in an impossible position. Their German commanders expected them to fight and die for the Reich, retreating deeper into Germany. However, their instinct and their duty, as they saw it, was to defend their own towns and villages from the advancing Soviets. This led to widespread desertions and a general lack of reliability in the eyes of the German High Command. For example, when the front lines reached the Baltic states, many Estonian and Latvian SS units effectively disintegrated. Soldiers abandoned their posts to try and protect their families or to join local partisan groups, fighting a desperate, multi-sided war. Their fight had been against the return of the Soviets, not necessarily for the victory of the Nazis. Once their homelands were lost, their motivation to continue fighting for a German cause evaporated. The Germans were merely a means to an end, and when that end became unattainable, the alliance fractured. This was a practical, survival-based decision, a stark contrast to the ideological fanaticism of the Charlemagne division. The French volunteers of Charlemagne faced no such dilemma. Their homeland was far away in the west, already under Allied control. There was no village to return to, no family to defend from the Red Army. Their only path forward was to remain with the German forces and fight to the very end. Retreating to France was not an option, as it meant certain arrest and execution as a traitor. This lack of a national fallback plan reinforced their ideological commitment. Their cause was all they had left. This made them paradoxically more dependable soldiers for the Germans in the final months of the war. They had burned their bridges, and their loyalty was to the crusade, not to a place on a map. The ultimate test of SS Charlemagne's loyalty came in the spring of 1945, during the Battle of Berlin. As the Soviet war machine encircled the German capital, the city's defense was left to a motley collection of regular army remnants, elderly Volkssturm militia, and Hitler Youth teenagers. Amidst this chaos, a few hundred of the most determined French SS volunteers, the last remnants of the Charlemagne division, chose to enter the city and make a final stand. They were led by SS Brigade Führer Gustav Krukenberg, a German commander who had come to trust their fanatical devotion. These Frenchmen were some of the very last defenders of the Reich Chancellery and Hitler's bunker. Their performance in the battle was a testament to their ideological conviction. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, the French SS fought with incredible ferocity. They were credited with destroying dozens of Soviet tanks in the desperate street-to-street fighting around the city center. They knew that defeat was inevitable. They knew that the war was over and that their cause was lost. Yet they refused to surrender. For them, this was not just a military engagement, it was the final act of their crusade. To surrender to the Bolsheviks they had sworn to destroy was unthinkable. It was better to die fighting for their beliefs than to face capture and humiliation. This refusal to yield, even in the face of certain annihilation, highlights the source of their loyalty. It was not based on military discipline in the traditional sense, nor was it born from any hope of victory. It came purely from their fanatical belief system. While German army units were surrendering en masse across the front, this small band of Frenchmen fought on. Their loyalty was to the idea of National Socialism and the anti-communist struggle, an idea they were willing to die for. Their actions in Berlin were the logical conclusion of the path they had chosen years earlier. They had given themselves completely to an ideology, and they followed it to its dark and violent end. In the end, their belief did not change the outcome of the war. The Third Reich collapsed, and the few survivors of Charlemagne who were captured by the Soviets were eventually handed over to the French authorities. They were tried as traitors, with many being executed or imprisoned. Their story is a grim reminder that loyalty born from extreme ideology can be a powerful and destructive force. The men of SS Charlemagne were not necessarily better soldiers than their Eastern European counterparts in terms of skill. However, their unwavering ideological conviction made them, in the twisted logic of the dying Reich, the most loyal of all. Loyal not to a country, but to a crusade that ended in the rubble of Berlin.